Hi, I'm Andrea and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about villains. I love this topic so much, and as I've grown as a writer, I just love villains more and more. You guys know that one of my big goals for my current work in progress is to make a really good villain, because this is something I've really struggled with in the past, to be honest. All of my villains from my past novels have been lacking. In hindsight, I look back and they just don't feel like a fully fleshed villain. They're not satisfying in some way. In fact, I've not actually said it online, but my last novel that I was working on, Legend Says, which I talked a lot about in videos on my lifestyle channel before I made this writing channel, specifically for my writing videos. But one of the biggest reasons why I decided to put that project aside and why I'm currently not working on it, I'm not pursuing a sequel, I'm not querying anymore with that project, it's because of the villain. That realization, combined with the fact that I've just always enjoyed a really good villain and I've always been interested in a really good villain, those things working together have resulted in my current work in progress, my Eliana story, having what I hope is going to be a very cool villain. As usual, I'm going to save the spoilery details for a future video because this book is still in revisions, it's still a work in progress, so I don't want to reveal too terribly much about my villain or my main character or the story, but I will just say it is a female. She's about 10 years older than my main character, and she comes from the same world as my main character, the world where people without magical abilities are born, but she has magical abilities and she's in the magical world. And I won't tell you any more about kind of her backstory, but basically her motivation is one of kind of vengeance as well as justice that she feels like she deserved for something in the past. And again, no more spoilers. But she has a very developed backstory, and her entire reason for being the villain of my story has to do with all of this that I've developed about her in a similar way to how you would develop a protagonist. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this video when I'm talking specifically about different aspects that I really tried to brainstorm and develop and work into the actual draft of my book. I made her a huge priority as I was writing this book, and I made her as interesting to myself. Like, I enjoyed writing about her and brainstorming and developing her character as much or more than I did some of my main characters. And there were times when I kind of wondered, maybe I should just write this book about her because I loved her so much. But then of course I realized this isn't because she needs her own story necessarily, it's just because she's a really fun and interesting character. At least that's how I feel about her. I hope that I can convey that in the story itself. Let's start with the backstory. Like I said, every good villain needs to have a good backstory. And they don't just need to have it off the page. You need to somehow work a little bit of that into the story for the reader to actually know and appreciate. Doesn't mean you have to write entire chapters from your villain's perspective, although I will say that's what I'm doing with my villain. It was something that kind of spontaneously occurred to me as I was writing the outline for my book. So before I'd even written the first chapter, I had this idea of maybe I'll throw in like 1 or 2 chapters from her perspective to kind of show different points of her life. It really just started as a kind of random idea, and I didn't give it that much stock. I thought, well, maybe it'll be interesting, but I really don't want to write a multi-POV story. I want this to be a 1 POV story, so I kind of put it to the side and thought maybe I'll do that. I don't think I actually completely decided I was going to do that until maybe I'd written the first chapter or 2, and as I was still kind of mulling over my story and my outline, and I had my outline, but I was still kind of tweaking things as I went. And I came back to this idea and I thought this actually might work. That kind of snowballed, and now I think I have 5 chapters from my villain's perspective, and they're all from different points kind of showing her backstory. This is not necessarily what you have to do to show a backstory, of course. You don't need to have any chapters from your villain's perspective, but however you do it, the reader needs to know a little bit about where the villain comes from and kind of what brought them to the point that they are now in the story. If they're just the evil king or the evil army general or the evil bandit or rebel, it's just not as interesting unless there's something there that you know about them more. They can be an evil king, they can be an army general, they can be a rebel, but you need to know a little bit more about their unique character backstory. It can't just be another one that we've seen in so many movies and books. How I did this was basically give her the same priority as I gave my main character when it comes to brainstorming and development. I'm gonna reference Evernote again. I swear I'm not sponsored, although I would love to be Evernote if you're interested, but I use Evernote, and she had her own separate character profile note that I put everything in, and I gave her the exact same boilerplate information as I do my main characters and all my other characters that have character profiles. Name, nicknames, family, where they're from, what languages they speak or don't speak, maybe if that's important, their habits and their tics, their physical features, their character features, their personality traits. All of these things are very, very important, and I wanted her to have her own set of traits in every single way. You can still give them some stereotypically evil things, like they came from a broken home or they have an evil laugh and things like that. You can use those, but just be careful that those aren't the only traits that you give your villain. Give them something else too. Make them in some way different from all the other villains that you've seen. Another really, really important aspect to think about is the motivation. So what is motivating your antagonist to be who they are? In a similar way to your protagonist didn't just wake up one day and think, I'm the hero in a book. Your antagonist didn't wake up one day and think, I'm the villain in a book. It just doesn't work like that. It's not realistic. And if you do that, if you just let them turn one day and just become a villain, or if that's all you ever show about them is just they are a villain, cookie cutter villain, then it's not going to feel like a really well-developed character. There has to be something that pushes them into this role, whether it's because they've been groomed to be a villain by someone else, so they've been puppeted, so that could cause a lot of maybe complex internal struggles, or maybe they were just raised like anyone else and no one ever thought they were going to become a villain, but then something made them snap, something made them desire a goal that led them on a path to becoming a villain. With the villain of my current work in progress, I have really tried in those chapters that I've given her, I've tried to kind of show how it's both an internal choice and motivation as well as an external one. I've tried to use these two things because, again, like a protagonist, I'm going to keep comparing it because I think it's the most helpful, at least for me. It's a mixture of internal and external. It's not all the world made me be this way. There has to be some sort of responsibility and ownership of what they're doing that makes them a villain. They're doing things that are bad. No matter what external circumstances are there has to be something inside the character that makes them choose to act upon those desires and goals and to act on them in a way that is hurtful, that is villainous. You can work with these two things in so many ways. You can have a villain who you want to be redeemable, so in that case maybe there's more external factors at play and only some internal factors. Or if you want a villain who is completely unredeemable, you need to have some sort of internal motivation that makes them do something that is so despicable. So it's really a balance of kind of setting a path for this character that will make your story happen and will also create a certain perspective of that villain and make your readers feel what you want to accomplish with that villain. My villain is not redeemable. I want the reader to understand that she's just gone too far. But I don't want it to be completely black and white. I don't want readers to immediately, when they meet her, to think, that's a really, really bad person. What I want to do is really develop her in a way that readers want her to be redeemable. It's actually kind of a difficult challenge, especially considering this is the first villain I've put this much effort into. So I set the bar really high for myself just right off the bat. Personally, I want her to be redeemable. And as I was writing her, I was tempted to make her redeemable, but it's just too good. And I want readers to feel that same struggle. So that was another reason why I made the choice to write some chapters from her perspective. I really want the readers to get in her head and to feel the kind of push and pull that she's feeling. Using those internal and external struggles and really developing what makes this character make their choices and what is motivating them to go on the path that you've set them on as the writer, and that will put them at odds basically with your main character or your main characters. And really developing all of that is going to make a much better villain. I forgot I made myself coffee. This has just been sitting in the background the whole time. You've probably heard this one before, but another thing that I was really trying to keep in mind as I was specifically developing this villain is that she needed to have weaknesses. And I'm not talking about a kind of kryptonite. I'm not talking about something that the main character can then exploit in order to defeat the villain. I'm talking about character weaknesses, internal weaknesses, things that the villain is just not good at, or things that the villain is struggling with themselves. Again, not just the great at Helm's Deep. I'm talking actual complex things that are happening inside your character's head. Everybody's got problems, even people who are actively being villains and actively doing bad things. It doesn't mean that they're just completely one-sided. Vulnerability is how Natalia Lee put it in her villains video, which I recently watched. It's a really good video. I'll link it in the description box below. But this is something I've been thinking about with my villain from day one. We love vulnerability because we are vulnerable, because we do have our own weaknesses that we're struggling with. So if you can see that in even a villainous character, it can make a huge, huge difference in making you feel something for that character. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is kind of interesting because it's not something I actively tried to develop with my villain, and it's not something I was even really thinking about as I was trying to develop and to write her into the first draft. Allyships and enemies of your villain, and enemies that are not just your main character or your main characters. This kind of dawned upon me really recently, actually. I'm talking like the past couple of weeks. I thought about this and I realized that in how I do this in the story and in how other stories have done this with really good villains, it's shown even more perspective on that villain. Basically what I mean by this is, who are your villain's friends? Who do they team up with? Who do they like or empathize with or work with or just agree with? And then who are they against? So who are the enemies to this villain? Not just your main character. Who else do they not like? Do they not get along with? Do they not side with? Do they actively work against, or have they actively worked against? Interestingly, my villain is actually a little bit of a loner, so she doesn't actively work with other people. She's not part of a team. She's not the leader of an army or royalty or something. She doesn't actively take part in some sort of group or lead a group. But that almost means that these allyships and enemy ships, that's not a word, but that almost makes them more powerful because it really shows who she's working with, who she's siding with, and therefore reflecting on who she is. It kind of helps form a bigger picture around your villain. You don't just have villain being red team and main character being blue team and they clash and that's it. It really forms a bigger, wider, more complex, humane perspective of how your villain is interacting within your world. Kind of makes me think about when you're on a first date and you watch how your date treats other people, not just you, but how they treat the waiter, for example, or other people around them, or how they talk about their friends or their siblings or their parents, because that shows a lot about who the person is, not just how they treat you. Kind of a similar thing, I guess, when it comes to your antagonist. Show how they interact with different people and how they feel and think about different people, and you will feel like as a reader you know more and you understand more about that antagonist. Okay, I have seriously neglected my coffee, so I really need to wrap up this video so I can go and enjoy this before it gets completely cold. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I would love to do more in the future. This is kind of just dipping my toe in the water when it comes to talking about how I'm crafting my villain, but also villains in general. I have learned so much in creating her that I didn't know even when I was reading about writing villains better, and I already knew that I wanted to write a better villain. In actually developing, writing, and now revising this character, I have learned so much, and there's always more to learn. So I'm sure as I continue to revise her and as I continue to work with this book, probably more things will dawn upon me, or I'll think about things that I've just forgotten to include in this video. So if you want to see more villains related content in the future, I would love to do it. So definitely give this video a like if you want to see more content like this, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and to turn on notifications if you want to see every time I upload a new writing video. I upload every Saturday, although occasionally I will miss a Saturday, but you can still find me on my Instagram and my Twitter. Not so much Twitter lately, I'm gonna be honest, but Instagram you will find me pretty much every day. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another writing video.